Hello and welcome to the Womxn Show. I'm Lenina Rassool, and today we are speaking about love, courage and insubordination, which is also challenging inequality and injustice. After the break, we are going to be speaking to Pregs Govender, who is an activist, a feminist, a teacher, a trade unionist, and also the author of the book Love and Courage, a story of insubordination, and who has now launched a new podcast called Love and Insubordination with the African Gender Institute. Now, I know that's a lot. We are going to be speaking about that and more. But before that, we are going to have a look at a short video about Pregs Govender and the work that she does.
The first founding value of South Africa's constitution is quite a revolutionary one. It's the belief that every single human being has dignity and that dignity is inherent. It's something that's our birthright. I think I was very aware about injustice from a very early age. I wanted to end poverty by the time I was 40 years old, and I wanted to reach nirvana by the time I was 60 years old. There are many, many women who instinctively understand that the way in which girls and boys are pigeonholed is wrong. The gender stereotypes constrain our freedom to be fully human. Parliament was very much a male institution. The floor I was on, there were no women's toilets. There were two sets of toilets. Both had a sign up saying men. And I remember just taking a piece of paper and writing women and sticking it over one of them. I work on the rights to water and sanitation over the last while, and it's probably the most basic rights. People often say, well, why aren't we solving this problem? So you can't solve the problem of water if you don't look at who is using most of South Africa's water, which is industry, who pollutes most of South Africa's water, industry, and that it's industry that wastes most of South Africa's water. Political systems, economic systems, and social systems have resulted in such poverty and inequality globally and in our country. They tend to be premised on nurturing the worst of human nature, that human beings will do anything to step on each other to get to the top. And I think that people want things to change. Many of us believe in the same goal of listening to those voices who can so easily be silenced, ensuring that people attain their human rights that are enshrined in the Constitution. The ability of each of us is also enriched by each other. The best collectives come when you have strength in each person in that collective. We have to focus on how we can use our power in a united way.
That was a short video on Pregs Govender and her work with love, courage, and insubordination. We are going to take a short break, but we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show, and we are in studio today speaking about love, courage, and insubordination. And with me in studio is Pregs Govender, who is an activist, feminist, teacher, trade unionist, and author of the book Love and Courage, A Story of Insubordination, and now the host of a new podcast by the African Gender Institute called Love and Insubordination. Pregs, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Lenina. I'm very excited to be on your show.
So we have been circling around this episode for a while, just so that everybody knows. And Pregs, I'm so excited to speak about the book and to speak about the podcast. But before we go into that, I wanted you to give us a little bit about who you are, and then also what is the African Gender Institute?
Who am I?
Big question.
That's the eternal question that everyone asks on deep spiritual journeys. So in terms of what I do, I'll start there. I'm a teacher and a writer and the author of Love and Courage, A Story of Insubordination. And I've used my teaching and writing to support people's connection to their own power of love, of what our Constitution talks about as inherent dignity, our birthright, our individual and collective birthright, and to use that power to change systems of injustice in our world. So I've used it both in the struggle against apartheid, as a teacher, trade unionist, feminist in organizing women, in the Natal Organization of Women, and in managing the Women's National Coalition, and as a trade unionist in the South African Clothing and Textile Workers Union and the Workers' College at UWC. And obviously during our democracy in Parliament and in the Human Rights Commission, amongst other places.
Thank you, Pregs. That is a great description of what I've been reading in your book, in your memoir. And then just a little bit, so this podcast, this new podcast that's based on the book has been launched by the African Gender Institute. And so just for our context, what is the African Gender Institute?
It's a feminist research and teaching institute that has left its footprint not just in our country. It's at the University of Cape Town, but it's hosted feminist writers and thinkers from across our continent, and it's engaged globally on advancing a feminist agenda.
Thank you. And on that note, to go into sort of the podcast.
Sure.
So this podcast was launched late last year. It's called Love and Insubordination. And we've had some chats about that word, insubordination. Yeah. And so I had said to you, when I first heard it, for me, it resonated in a way, and I think especially as a woman, because women are raised often to obey. And so it felt, it resonated as wrong or as going against the rules. As being insubordinate is often used as to insult women or to put them back in their place. And so I wanted to ask you about that word, insubordination, why it was used, what you meant in terms from your context.
So you're right. I mean, I think women are taught to be subordinate. But I think it's also all oppressed groups are expected to be subordinate to unjust systems of political, economic, military power. And to accept often our dehumanization, to comply with that. And I think there have always been people who have resisted that and who've asserted our full humanity and the respect for that. So insubordination is really about, it is in the context of love. It's in the context of, I think, the most powerful revolutionaries have been insubordinate to local and global systems of injustice, using the power of love.
And so I wanted to ask about that. This love and insubordination, sort of in the putting it in the same sentence. You speak about injustice, and there is so much right now. We encounter a lot. I read a lot in your book. South Africa's got a history of apartheid, so it needed a lot of insubordination. But justice
Not just apartheid, because apartheid, often people think of it just simply as a racist system. But the apartheid state was a patriarchal, capitalist, and racist state. And that's really important to understand, that in fact capitalism is a global system. And under capitalism, inequality across the world has increased. And we've seen the worst forms of brutality in terms of the choices of war, for example, instead of life. So the production right now in Israel's genocide in Palestine, of the Palestinian people, we've seen that there's unlimited budgets in the United States, in Europe, in Britain, for military hardware, for the bombs that fall on Gaza. And yet, in their own countries, they're applying what are generally referred to as neoliberal policies, which are policies that entail cuts to essential areas of life and human well-being, like healthcare and education. These are thought of and described as commodities to be bought and sold on the international markets, and really are not defined under capitalism as human rights.
That is a very interesting statement. I'm going to veer off a little bit here, if I can, and ask you something.
I think the thing of it is that, you know, in the United States, for example, a corporation is defined as a human being with rights, as human rights.
Which is bizarre.
Which is utterly bizarre. So yes, you feel free to ask me.
So Pregs, you're a teacher, you've been a teacher, you've taught in schools.
Yes, I have.
One of the things we do on the Womxn Show is, and especially when we started, there was all of this language and this narrative that I myself didn't understand, right? So patriarchy, for one, is something that we heard about. I like to go back to when I started the show, I said, I thought I was feminist because I was married and working. And I thought that's what being feminist was. And we've spent so much time sort of trying to unpack that as a system. Systems are often not visible. And so one of the things that I've been looking into recently is capitalism. But when we introduce concepts, we like to sort of start at baseline. Can you give us a broad idea of what is capitalism as a system? Because I think also when we are living in a world that is so big on entrepreneurship and money as in making a lot of money and wealth and so forth, we don't think about the things that you are saying, for instance, looking at health and looking at food as commodities. Yet
instead of human rights.
Instead of human rights.
So capitalism has, I think the best way of defining it is its objective. Its objective is to make the maximum profit for corporations, for companies. And that issue of making maximum profit is really not about what is in the best interests of humanity or the earth. So you should be free of regulations to sell your products at whatever price you wish to. So, for example, with patents, you can take medicines that have been developed in publicly funded institutions, research, universities, etc., and an individual, a corporate or a corporation, can patent that medicine and sell it at 100 times the cost that it took to produce it, and make billions in the process. So you are never going to be able to have universal health care, for example, or an end to hunger in the world, and you have over 1 billion people going hungry every day. And that's across the world, including in our country. And the worst numbers of people who are going hungry right now per in terms of a population is in Gaza. So the issue is really about then how capitalism, and I think we saw it in our country, in terms of the development of our country. It was the Dutch East India Corporation and its interests that actually landed it here in the Cape. And it's put very benignly, as they came here for water and refreshments. It was a very brutal experience for the people that were living here in the Cape. And so it's not a benign system. It's a system that has resulted in, so it rejects being regulated. And you see that even recently at the gathering, there was a business panel, and one of the panelists said, well, you know, yes, we want to create jobs and but, you know, the workers need to lower their standards, lower their wages.
Oh, wow, that was said.
So, yes, it was said. And so, and you know, it wasn't challenged. It was sort of, well, actually, if the CEOs of corporations are earning the kinds of millions that they do, if you have corporations that make billions a year in our country and across the world, how dare they say that they are able to do that by rolling back workers' rights? And to blame then the trade unions across the world for protecting and standing up for basic rights at the workplace.
Because, and can I just say something? So, and there's it's framed around this narrative.
Capitalism operates across the world. In Russia right now, the system isn't communism. That was overthrown. It was overthrown. There was Gorbachev. It was overthrown. And what replaced it was rampant capitalism. So the growth of oligarchs, which is another word for billionaires, in Russia was exponential. And so the pushback, I think, is that we actually have to understand is that across the globe, the dominant system is a capitalist system. And so when we're looking at what's going wrong in our country, well, actually capitalism has been functioning without challenge, real challenge, in our country and globally. So when we're looking at what's the root causes of crime, or what's the root causes of anything, how will you end that if the system itself has no respect for human rights and has no respect for dignity, actually is both in corruption. So, I mean, you know, our arms deal, what was the real interests there that were at play?
I want to ask, and so it's interesting you say that, because the capitalism also has got the face of these, we talk about, you said the objective is to make a maximum profit. And we think of, and I think I do also want to ask you about how the media, we have a media proliferation now of glorifying wealth. We see our children, all this reality TV shows, everything, it's become the space that we should aim for when actually it's part of the problem. But I want to ask you, so
and
capitalism...
it creates huge levels of depression and suicide.
Yeah. But
because it actually builds in unemployment, so you can keep cheap labor.
Pregs, we need to take a short break.
Sure.
But we will be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show, and we are still talking about love, courage, and insubordination. And still with us here in studio is Pregs Govender, Pregs Govender, who is an activist, feminist, teacher, trade unionist, and author of the book Love and Courage, a story of insubordination. And also now the host of the podcast Love and Insubordination, which we've been speaking about. And Pregs, before the break, you were speaking about, we were speaking about what is capitalism actually, and how systems operate, and often, it's so invisible to us. We're experiencing these different parts of a system, but we can't quite see how they all fit together. And one of the things you said before we went to break was, when we want to challenge something, or when something is being introduced to us, and you were talking about the food system, you said we should be asking for proof. And you also said, when we challenge decisions, often we have to enter a decision-making space. And I want to speak about that decision-making space, because I've been reading your book, and I want to bring out sort of one experience that really sat with me. Because on the Womxn Show, we speak about gender-based violence. A lot of that conversation is centered in the decision-making spaces and what happens there. So in your experience, there was this experience where you had laid a charge against a male colleague for assault. And what happened, I ideally want to tell the audience, is what happened is then a meeting was called at the perpetrator's home, at the home of the person that had assaulted you. The decision-making committee was a group of men. And what the outcome was, that you had antagonized this man into assaulting you, and you were then ordered to drop this charge. And I have to say, that just hit me right here, right? Because that is the story of almost every survivor who comes onto this show, whether that process is taking place within a family, or whether it's taking place within the justice system. And so we encounter this type of injustice in systems all of the time. Actually, the Womxn Show is conceptualized around after you report. Because everyone says if something is wrong, you must report it. But after you report, often everything falls apart. You are disbelieved, or your words are twisted, or you are just ignored. And so the title of your first podcast is What Do I Do With My Heart? And I was reading your book, reading you going through these experiences and wondering, how does one survive these injustices? I think I want to pose that question to you here now.
Okay, one of the things that I think is difficult for anyone who's gone through that experience is to discuss it in a public space.
Yeah.
And I suppose at the time when it happened, it was incredibly difficult to deal with it. Because there wasn't the systems of justice that I've worked so hard with countless other feminists through the Women's National Coalition campaign before we came to Parliament, and within Parliament in the Committee on the Quality of Life and Status of Women, to ensure that we changed the laws so that our country today, there's the Constitution, which upholds the right to gender equality, to women's rights, to non-sexism, to inherent dignity. There are laws such as the Domestic Violence Act, the Sexual Offences Act. There are changes to the labor laws in relation to a whole range of areas. So I think one of my most powerful ways of dealing with that injustice in that moment was over the long term, to actually change those mechanisms, to create institutions, to make visible what happens. Because gender-based violence didn't start in 1994. We don't, it's not recorded, but if you read between the lines in terms of the diaries of the first colonizers in 1652, for example, Jan van Riebeeck and his colleagues, when they talk about when they brought across slaves, girls, young girls, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, they are referred to as chattel slavery. And what is chattel slavery? Chattel slavery is that girls and women, and quote unquote, for labor, for sex, for breeding, unquote. What exactly does that mean to a 10-year-old girl, a 12-year-old girl, 14, 16, 18, 20, 23, 24, whatever your age is, an older woman, without your consent? Who do you speak to? Where did they go? Where did all of those people go? This didn't start in 1994. What happened in 1994 is those of us who had to deal with that through our organizing work and individually and personally, were determined to break the silence in our country and to ensure that there was recourse to justice. So there was an incredible amount of work that we did. So when I came to Parliament, for example, I was given the Beijing report to the UN Conference on Women that had been compiled by apartheid bureaucrats. It omitted all the women in apartheid's former homelands. What does that mean? It omitted the voices of millions of black women in our country. And so part of it was to change that, to say that you cannot send a report on the status of women in our country and keep invisible the majority of women in our country. There were no statistics when I was in the Finance Committee and we interrogated the stats essay, well, it was a different name then. No stats were kept on rape, on gender-based violence. So we demanded that we begin to keep it. And there are many countries in the world where such statistics are not kept. It's a political decision. So the United States, for example, the FBI used to keep the statistics on femicide, but between the two wars, the two Gulf Wars, femicide rates went through the roof. Because war always increases gender-based violence. In fact, soldiers are trained with horrific songs that they sing. And you know the famous American song, "This is my rifle, this is my gun, this is for fighting, this is for fun." So it's built into the system. And when South Africa
issued its rape statistics, the FBI then incorrectly stated that South Africa had the highest rape statistics in the world. And in fact, it was amongst the highest reported rape statistics, which was a victory for the women of our country, for all the women of our country, that we succeeded in making this an issue, that it wasn't just in the personal, private domain, but it was in the public domain. And we had to change this culture that goes back to biblical times and beyond. And if you look at the religious texts, it's horrifying. There's a lot now about what is the quote that Netanyahu has been talking about in terms of giving the right to kill every man, woman, and baby. I forget the Amalek. The reference to the Amalek. And of course, we know about all these stories of how the other is treated in religious texts. So it's really changing that requires changing not just the individual, but it's also changing simultaneously all those systems, whether they are economic, political, military, religious, ideological, educational, media. The media has a huge role in this regard, but it's not alone.
It's one part.
It's one part. And who holds power across all of those systems? And the continuity of the system is important to understand. And so we must challenge, and we change the laws in our country to challenge individuals who violated, who raped, who abused. We created institutions, special courts, which never existed, and one-stop centers for the reporting. And yes, there are, and shelters that were state-funded. So and it's a long, long way to go to change that. But we will never change the problem only by looking at the end result and the consequences. We have to look at what's the causes. So in a patriarchal, misogynistic world, in a world which believes that those who are other than those who hold privilege can be abused, can be exploited. You have to change the realities that cause women to be vulnerable, be in very vulnerable situations. So, for example, if your corporations are creating precarious work in which women finish late, have to rely on unsafe public transport or unsafe private transport, get to homes in unlit areas where the transport can't even travel right to their door. And they have to walk the remainder of the way in darkness. And they come to homes where the doors can be kicked down. They have to go to a toilet outside their home, across busy streets. They have to collect water far from their homes. You will never address the problem of gender-based violence only if you see it as a criminal justice issue. And if you see it as, in a capitalist world where toxic masculinity is encouraged in corporate boardrooms through to advertising that promotes a particular notion of who we should be and who we are to, every single aspect of our lives, then both men, those classified in terms of gendered roles and stereotypes, no one is able to claim their full humanity. We're all constrained. None of us are free. And to be able to address gender-based violence, you have to address both the immediate result, the short-term impact, because when that happens to me or when that happens to you, you're not interested in all of this bigger context. You want to see the person who did this dealt with. You want to see that they will never do this again. But if you deal with it simply in terms of prisons, we know that prisons actually are places that entrench criminal behavior. They entrench gangs. They don't change behavior. So you have to think short term and long term.
And then you almost circle. You can circle back, and you can see how the cycle goes. I want to ask you, is on that note then, a lot of women enter activism, into the activist space. You speak about this process. So when it happens, you want to see sort of immediate recourse. You want to see action taken. You want to see someone maybe that would be prosecuted and go to jail. Our conviction rate, our prosecution and conviction rates, are not just in South Africa, I mean across the world, is very low, under 10%.
That's right.
So a lot of people enter activism through their personal experience.
Yeah.
They then see the system almost becomes visible as you move through it. And so they see there's no immediate result, but there's also this other thing where they realize that the system is biased, that, and for me it was that the rules that are written down, and I love to say that women are rule followers. So the first thing we go do, we tackle it like it's a school assignment. If you want to see a rule follower, go to a woman who is applying for child maintenance, who arrives at the child maintenance court with everything stamped, printed, stapled in a file, and have someone not even look at that file and say to you, we've had on the show, well, this guy says he's only got 500 Rand to give you, and he hasn't even brought his pay slips. None of the evidence is looked at. That is the point of breakdown for a lot of people. And I read a quote that I can't get out of my head. The cover-up is worse than the crime. So what happens afterwards, which is less seen, often many women I meet, and just to stay on maintenance court, will just take on the extra financial burden and never go there again, never put themselves in such an undignified circumstance again, where their humanity is not recognized, where the evidence is not taken into account. I love that you brought up all the progress that has been made from a legislative and an institutional perspective. But what we are seeing, I think, is those institutions don't work as they should. And we have this trauma that is associated with the cover-up is worse than the crime. We don't have a lot of time left, but I don't want to end on that negative note. I see your book as continuing anyway. And so we have 3 minutes. Maybe there's something that you can tell us about what it takes to continue to have courage in the face of a lot of institutions, laws, and so forth that isn't quite working right now.
So those were never meant individual laws or policies aren't the solution on their own. Nothing is there's no one plaster that's going to fix a deep wound. And so there are multiple strategies that those changes were part of. So, and one of the most important of those changes was what we called participatory democracy. So in Parliament, as well as in the Human Rights Commission, one of the most important powers of both those institutions was to ensure that the voices of those that are directly impacted are heard in decision making. So on water and sanitation, we went in the Human Rights Commission to every province and listened, but didn't just listen to people who directly affected. We asked those responsible with power in government to be present, not to give the fancy speech and leave, but to sit and listen to what people were saying and to respond within a time frame of how they were going to ensure water or sanitation. And the same with Parliament, because really in every single area, whether it was gender-based violence or customary law or access to land and property inheritance, whether it was in relation to macroeconomic policy and gender budgets, we had hearings, both with people directly impacted and people who had studied this and looked at different solutions.
Pregs, I'm so sorry to cut you. Okay. We are out of time for this segment, but I'm going to hold that thought.
Right.
And we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show, and we have been having an incredible conversation about love, courage, insubordination, about injustice and challenging injustices. And still with me in studio, Pregs Govender. We were speaking before the break. I had asked you about systems that don't work, and how do you hold your heart through that, I think was the question. And you came back and you said, none of the legislation and policy and so forth that was put into place was a one-stop solution. That single thing alone doesn't solve the issue. And you came and you were speaking about some of the participatory processes that happened alongside that. And I just want to recap quickly. You said how that often was done was having the voices of the people directly affected heard, and having the people in power there not to give big speeches, but to come and listen and then formulate and provide feedback on solutions to solve the problem. And I just wanted you to finish that thought.
So I think the thing of public participation is critical. It's one of the powers of Parliament in our new democracy in 1994 was go to the people, listen to them, learn from them, and respond. Because it's not, and I think that's a really important principle. So if we take the HIV and AIDS debacle, when people were not able to access treatment in public hospitals, although we as members of Parliament could, if we needed to access it from our own medical aid. The reality was that you had a lot of, and this is a problem across political parties, because then it illustrates that the issue of groupthink and the issue of people not prepared to question those in leadership. So the party hierarchy. And this is across every single political party. And what we did was to hold public hearings where we brought people who'd been demonstrating in the streets, who'd been taking government to court, like the Treatment Action Campaign, and a whole range of people who'd been working in hospitals and scientists and doctors and community health workers to Parliament to come and present what was happening to them. And we asked government ministers to come also to those hearings and to respond and to deal with what they had said. And then in presenting that report, which was very difficult to actually get permission to present it to the ANC caucus, the presentation of the facts to people who were there in the place where power was being used in a way that did not meet the needs of the people who put us in parliament. In the face of that challenge, in a very calm, clear way, was critical in people responding. There was an overwhelming response from all the MPs, the ANC MPs in that room to say never again. This must never happen. And thank you for raising it here in this space. So that issue of reminding people of who they themselves are, their love, their courage, their insubordination, is a real critical part of transformation. So what sustains me is constantly being reminded of that when I forget, by the people that I meet, by my own members of my own family, my own children, the grandchildren in the family. There's 5 of them now. And their love, their joy reconnects to this, reconnects to our power, because it is from that place that we are sustained watching a sunrise, having a moment. I describe a moment in the book. In the garage we'd moved to after Group Areas Act, moved our family out of our home. We all lived in this little garage. And I describe watching the ants walk up the wall. And what was one of my favorite things was watching these ants. So to drop into life provides many opportunities for us to reconnect to who we are, the question you began with, who each of us is. And so from that we can continue to live our lives well and create the world of our dreams. Even in the moments when people are being bombed, the thing that you see is their love and courage. When the world denies the genocide, they are filming their own destruction by Israel and the US and Britain and Germany's bombs. They are filming it for all of us to see. So I think when we're reminded of that, when it brings to mind our own humanity. And Biko made that beautiful quote, and I can't remember his exact words, but he said, the greatest gift South Africa will give to the world is our humanity. And I think the ICJ case did that.
Just want to take a moment and sit and breathe on that. That was so beautiful, Pregs. I mean, thank you for that gift. That was just like, I think, a wonderful example, case study to end off with. I think that the importance that I take from it, and I think that we should take from it, is the importance of keep raising our voices and keep telling our stories and keep also just holding on to and displaying our collective humanity. And that with that, we are out of time. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And that brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you for joining us. I'm Lenina Rassool with Pregs Govender. Goodbye.